What was your most shocking discovery in an ancestry test? My biological dad left his family and 2 daughters in Washington and married my mum in LA 5 weeks later. I found his first marriage certificate, but nothing about a divorce. I'm pretty sure he was a bigamist.
My father-in-law was married to at least 2 women at a time. Nice guy, but a man whore. And I think he just didn't want to let each woman down when she got pregnant and/or started bringing up marriage. My mother-in-law says that he was already married when they got married, but we also know that he has a child 3 months younger than my husband, and the woman and child both go by the father-in-law's last name. And that's not the woman mother-in-law claims he was married to when he married her. So he might possibly have had 3 wives at the same time. My husband has upwards of 10 half-siblings from his dad. Who has the time? Bigamy seems exhausting. Someone very close to me discovered that none of the ethnic background that they were expecting was present in the results. This person, whose father was deceased at the time, questioned their mother. The mother admitted that the person's father was not biological as they had believed their entire life. They were older than 40, by the way. The mother gave the name of the biological father. My friend then found the biological father, contacted him, and then discovered that they had several half-siblings. The biological father was unaware that he had another child and accepted my friend into his family, as did the siblings. I found out my dad is not my biological father. Turns out the family friend I grew up calling Grandpa is. Oh yeah, and he was also my mum's bariatric surgeon. That felt weird, man. Dang, he was supposed to make her belly smaller, and he made it bigger instead. I have an uncle that was put up for adoption. He contacted my grandma and she thought he was going to extort her. They're well off. Turns out he's a multi-millionaire on his own. They still have limited contact, though my dad has reached out and formed a relationship. Apparently they look exactly alike and have the same personality, which sounds kind of stupid now that I'm writing it out, but they're only half-siblings. Me and my half-brother look pretty much the same, and have very similar personalities despite having different dads. It's even funnier because I'm female, so does he look like a girl or do I look like a boy? Oh god. Best not to go down that wormhole. Why don't you just say that your beauty has a genderless quality like Tilda Swinton or David Bowie? Those 2 could basically be long-lost siblings anyway, and then you can move on. I was adopted and always knew I was adopted. My parents told me that I came from a family that had already had all of their kids. They lived several towns over. I was a surprise to them. 3 years ago, my wife decided to take some DNA tests. I figured, what the heck, maybe I'm a part Zulu warrior. That'd be cool. When the tests came back, I found out I had a first cousin. They had listed a public email. I emailed them, started comparing notes, and wham! I was in for quite a surprise. First, I was not born into a traditional family. Instead, my biological mum was single. Second, I was not a late addition. I had 4 sisters and 1 brother. I was the baby, but only by a couple of years. Third, mostly all of them lived nearby. Finally, nobody knew I was alive. My biological mum had passed. She had kept the pregnancy secret from everybody else. Before she died, she had confided in one of my biological sisters that she'd had a baby a long time ago, and she'd put the baby up for adoption. She'd told nobody else. When my sister told the rest of the family, they didn't believe her. So when I finally looked them up, she was like, "See? All those years, I told you so. We have a baby brother." It was an amazing experience. I had no idea what I was getting into when I sent that DNA test off. So I'm in a similar boat. I was given up for adoption by my biological mum and none of her family knew about me. However, I was not her first or last child. I was her second of 4 kids. My older half-brother, we all have different dads, I don't know who mine is and I don't think my bio-mum does either, was adopted by my mom's parents. Her whole family found out about me when I found her when I was 19 and went to visit. It was pretty weird. I feel like the lucky one who got out. I don't talk to my bio-mom. She's not a good parent to my 2 younger brothers, and I hate that she pretends to know me or be my parent. My wife is adopted but found her bio-mum and did one of the genetic tests. Someone matched with her and asked if she knew such and such a name. She found out her bio-mum's husband wasn't the bio-dad and it was the bio-mum's boss. Whoops. Not gonna lie, I'm adopted and I'm the daughter of an affair some unnamed man had with a waitress in her early 20s. I have no desire to take those DNA tests. Your wife is brave. My aunt discovered that her mother cheated on her father and she was the product of that affair, meaning she was only actually half-siblings with her 4 siblings. The rub was that my aunt's husband was married before he married her. The woman he was married to is the daughter of the man involved in the affair. So no one knew this, but my uncle got divorced and then married his ex-wife's half-sister.
I guess he has a type. Wow, did it cause any problems with the family, finding out the other mother cheated? They only found out recently, long after the parents had died. I think my aunt is very ashamed to learn of it, but not any problems. My aunt knew her husband's ex from growing up and never liked her. I don't think she has any intention of having a relationship with her. A woman over in Chicago decided to find out who her real parents were. She was getting close to 60 and realized that there may not be much time left to find her father. So through the magic of Ancestry, she was matched to my grandfather. She reached out to him and told him who her mother was. He didn't recognize the name but dug up his little black book and lo and behold, there she was. So now I've got a new aunt. My male cousin did one and found a female cousin that we didn't know about. He reached out to her and apparently our deceased uncle was good friends with her mother. Mum wanted a baby, so uncle got her pregnant simply as a sperm donor. Female cousin lived a few blocks away from my grandmother. She had met her a few times going around selling Girl Scout cookies or something. My grandmother had no idea that she was buying cookies from her granddaughter.
That's crazy. I can't believe days go by and you wouldn't even know about your own granddaughter. Was it a coincidence that they lived so near to each other? I imagine since they live so close, they've gotten closer because of this as well.
My grandmother never knew. She was very old-fashioned and would not have been pleased with the thought of her son having a child with someone he wasn't married to. We didn't know the cousin existed until after my grandmother passed away. I was approached by a married lesbian couple to be such a donor, but I was never able to bring myself to do it. I don't like the idea of having a kid that's technically mine running around and having nothing to do with him or her. I also found out from Googling that there really is no legal provision for such a situation, so you can get forced into child support at pretty much any time. Found out I have a different father. My dad also took a DNA test at the same time and found out his father, of 52 years, was not his biological father either. As it turns out, I come from a line of bastards, where beer does flow and men chunder.
You should just watch out if your wife ever gets pregnant, though.
I found a half-sister that none of my siblings or mother knew about. My dad had an affair 50 years ago. He's dead now. For us, it wasn't really a surprise. We already knew we have a half-sister from another affair, but for the newly discovered one, it answered a lot of questions and gave her some needed closure. We all met a few times. It was pleasant. I like to think that there'll be lots of silver linings in these discoveries. So far, we haven't found out that anyone came from a family of war criminals or slaveholders, but I'm sure we'll find one by the end of the video. A friend who never knew who his father was, Mum had a weekend fling in college and never contacted the guy after, had his wife help him to use Ancestry.com to try and track him down. My friend reached out and the guy was obviously surprised but flew across the country to meet him. They have a great relationship now, the dad attended his wedding, and they try to get their families together a couple of times a year or so.
That's awesome. I was hoping DNA testing would find my husband's dad, but no such luck. Never found anyone on his possible dad's side closer than about a third cousin, so no luck even finding anyone who knows who he might be. My real father and my 3 half-siblings. It ended up being a really good discovery. Had a great uncle who learned that he had a son from his teenage years that he never knew about. Luckily, he was able to meet him before he passed away.
Same here. At the age of 60, I discovered who my real father was and that I have 9 half-siblings. He was a bit of a dog. A friend discovered that her father was not really her father. Her mum had had an affair, and she was the result. It tore her family apart. Her father did not know he was not really her father. Note that she was 45 years old when this happened.
I can understand the fallout with the mum and wife over the affair and secret, etc., but did her father basically end up treating your friend any differently after that?
Yes, he basically stopped talking to her. She was very hurt by that. I don't know that he's ever started talking to her again. He was always a bit distant, but he just stopped their relationship. Yeah, no way. My daughter is 4, and if I found out she wasn't mine, I would be very upset and may have issues with my wife, but my girl would always be my girl. My son is my 4th cousin. We adopted him as an infant from an agency. Fun to find that we are actually related.
What an innocent way to loop a branch back around in a family tree.
Not me, but a family friend. He did the test and found out that he had a half-brother. Turns out his dad had an affair a while back, and that kid was a product of that affair. A full 100% older brother. My mother got pregnant by my father before they were married. Scandalous in 1960. So, with my father's knowledge of the situation, Mum left town and lived with my aunt until the birth. Mum gave the baby up for adoption and then returned home. A couple of years later, she married my dad and had 3 more children together, including me. 55 years later, after both my parents had died, my aunts let it slip that me and my siblings were not the only children of our parents. To paraphrase from Star Wars, there is another. My sister took a DNA test, and a couple of years later she got a hit. Soon thereafter we met our new big brother and his family, wife and kids, and we've all become quite close. This is the exact same story as my mother. She was the one given away and met her 3 sisters for the first time when she was about 50. So if your parents were to explain what happened to them and how they gave the baby up, when do you think you'd want to have heard the news? Like when you were little kids? Teens? Early 20s adults? This is a sincere question, but feel free not to answer. I would have preferred hearing it from them after I became an adult. From Mum, at least. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. My cousin took a test and goes on and on about how she's almost completely Irish. Our grandpa was German. I've heard from my mum as a kid that my aunt's biological father was probably her friend's father. I've looked the family up on Facebook and my aunt looks just like that friend. My cousin seems to have no idea of any of this. I don't think my aunt does either. Similar in my family, German grandpa has a child and grandchildren with no German blood. He's passed a few years ago, but the evidence is there. My ex-husband's family were proud of their Dutch heritage and claimed to be one of the founding families of the historically Dutch Holland, Michigan. His ancestry results didn't show any Dutch ancestry, instead he had primarily English and Irish ancestry. Oh my gosh, I grew up in West Michigan. The amount of people who say, if you ain't Dutch, you ain't much, without having an ounce of Dutch in them is hilarious. The Netherlands today has the reputation of being a fun-loving, party-happy, hippie country because of 100 years ago all of my ancestors leaving and everyone who stayed behind hasn't stopped celebrating. One of my best friends has a very French name and her family was always very proud of their French heritage, until her dad took a DNA test and found no French in their background at all. I remember someone posting on Reddit about the same thing. They were from a very Italian family. All Italian first names, they only ate Italian food. You know, the way Nana used to make it. Just super into their Italian identity. The guy found out through a test they were all Polish or something, and everyone in the family lost their minds. That my father is a registered unspeakable act offender. Parents are divorced, if you're wondering. How did a DNA test reveal that? Arrest records, archived newspaper articles, you'd be shocked at what information is publicly available in some areas. My dad and aunt found out they had an older brother. Long story, my grandfather had a fling before he met my grandmother, never even knew that he had a son, went and lived his life, and some near 60 years later? Boom, ancestry test, here you go. So another really good story from this one. I exported my raw DNA from 23andMe and threw it through Prometheus to find out why I have porphyria, which is supposed to be hereditary. My mum and dad are definitely my mum and dad, but neither of them have this, which means it was environmental exposure that caused it. Discovered a rare AMPD enzyme deficiency in my mum, found out that dad carried a recessive lupus gene and gave it to my sister. DNA is wild. So I did a similar health DNA test 18 months ago because I wanted to see if I had the breast cancer gene, as there are several incidences on both sides of my family. Got my results and became very confused. It claimed I had no Italian, despite my father's grandma literally coming over from Sicily in 1920. It took me a few minutes to realize what that actually meant. My parents have been together since my mother was 14. I was born when she was 17, and my father joined the military and married my mother. Called my mum and she literally said, "That's interesting." Then she asked me to not talk to my father and she would explain everything the next time I visited. She did not and just refused to talk about it. Honestly, I was just shook. I didn't see it coming and it was never even presented to be a possibility to me. My sister ended up doing a DNA test and it showed that we were half siblings. I went no contact with my mother 4 months ago due to this incident and several others. I haven't told my dad, but I realized that at some point the truth is going to come out. My sister matched with some of my father's relatives while I did not, so if anyone checks that crap, they're going to be asking questions. Yep, even as a big advocate of the truth, I can see why you wouldn't want to be telling your dad. As some people have pointed out, a couple of people just can't see past the betrayal of their spouse and the realization that they aren't actually related to their children. I hope it all works out okay whatever way it goes. Always thought my grandfather on my father's side was adopted and thought our last name was just that of the family that adopted him. One DNA test later, and the family figures out that my great-grandparents got pregnant out of marriage and ran away. They came back with a child, saying it was adopted so they wouldn't be shamed for him. That's how we figured out that my last name is for sure from blood. Not me, my wife. A few years ago, my wife and I both took the 23andMe test. One of her matches came back with 23%, which is high for someone non-family. She messaged him and they started talking. He was about 10 years older and said he was adopted, and the only thing he knew was some basic biological info. From his age, that would have put her mum at 14, but her mum never said anything about it. So the two options were her mum got knocked up young or grandma had a secret love child. She asked her youngest uncle, who said that when he was a kid, he remembered his sister going away for a few months because she was sick, and the family just pretended it never happened. He also said that before his mum, my wife's grandma, passed away, she told him all about it. So now my wife has a brother, a sister-in-law, and nieces and nephews. My mother-in-law is still around, but my wife does not have the best relationship with her. So my wife wanted to make sure she had all the information before she even approached her mother about this. Because in my wife's words, her mum, she's a few crayons short of a full pack. But yeah, they talked about it, and after trying to change the subject several times, her mum finally told her what we'd already figured out. We found out that my grandmother was biracial. She was abandoned shortly after birth at a church by an older white lady, adopted by a white farmer with 11 kids, and stopped talking to most of that family due to nondescript unpleasantness as an older teen. She died 20 years before I was born and looks like Maya Rudolph in the few photos that I've seen, but insisted she was part Sicilian. My father and his brother both look more white than not. My father worshipped the ground she walked on and never questioned her ancestry. My uncle was always pretty sure she was black and argued with her a lot. Both dad and uncle ended up being super active in the civil rights movement and still are devoted to anti-racism work nearly 60 years on, which largely stemmed from these discussions growing up. Anyway, my mum, divorced from my dad, got me a DNA test a few years ago. My grandmother was definitely half black. I have no Sicilian or Italian DNA. I've connected with a few black distant cousins over email and Zoom, and I'm waiting for the pandemic to mostly end to talk to my dad about it and introduce him to more family. I bet Italian got used as an explanation for darker skin quite a lot. Apparently, many mixed-race individuals back then attributed their darker skin to Native American or Italian ancestors. I knew about being conceived using ART, but I didn't know about the Dugarish number of half-siblings I had from the same donor. Frankly, it blindsided my parents too. The documentary The World's Biggest Family is about a man who finds out he has about 600 half-siblings from his sperm donor father. Things like this have led to tons of reform surrounding sperm donor laws. Imagine all of the involuntary inbreeding that could come out of an unchecked system. It's scary, but a lot less likely to happen now, thankfully. Not me, but a friend. My friend, 34, female, decided to get her twin sister and parents a DNA testing kit for Christmas. When her parents opened the gift, they looked at each other and said, "Oh, thanks." They quickly tried to move on to other presents. My friend was slightly confused, but dropped it. Later they went for their Christmas Day walk. The mum and sister were walking ahead while she walked with her dad. Her dad spilled the beans. Her and her sister were adopted. The mother looked back and started crying. She couldn't believe her husband told her daughter without them talking about it first. They were going to keep it a secret forever. She'd never suspected she or her sister were adopted because they looked a lot like their parents. They're also very short, as are their parents. Whoops! My great-gran, who I knew, was an orphaned live-in servant in Greenock, Scotland in 1900. Got pregnant by her employer, got kicked out, ended up in the poorhouse where she abandoned the baby. DNA turned up the granddaughter of the baby. I met her in Glasgow a couple of years ago. She turned up as a cousin via DNA. I took a DNA test and found out I'm ethnically 25% Ashkenazi. After 8 months of serious digging, I found out my grandpa, my father's dad, is not my father's biological father. I have since come into contact with my half-uncle. He's super nice and I enjoy chatting with him. I love learning about my bio-grandpa and the rest of my family. We haven't told them and I don't plan on it. I have a small family, so it was such a great comfort to connect with more family, understand my lineage, and the history of my Jewish ancestors. Really a lovely experience. Hey, you might want to check if you have factor 11 deficiency. Pretty common. Shalom, fellow Ashkenazi. My great-great-grandfather claimed to be descended from Levites and said he was 100% Levite. I doubt it, it's been thousands of years, but I'm curious if your family said things like that too. My grandmother is the world's sweetest person and had a horrible, horrible woman as a mother. Her father, though, was incredible. She always talks about how I remind her of him, the small and sweet things they did together, and how much she misses him. Recently, she told me that her mother would tell her, "He isn't your real father, you know," whenever she felt like hurting my grandmother some more. This continued until the day she died, and her father escaped her mother's abuse, and never spoke to my grandmother again. My Nana doesn't blame him at all and still loves him very much to this day. She decided to go on Ancestry because she said she needs to know before she dies, although she said it wouldn't change anything about how she felt about him. Turns out, her awful mother was right. My grandmother found her biological family and loves to talk about her French heritage that she's learning about now. To this day, she doesn't hold anything against her non-biological dad. He took care of my grandmother when her mother wouldn't, knowing it wasn't his child. He loved her, soothed her, and nurtured her through as if she were his own. He saved my grandmother's spirit, I'll tell you that much. He helped shape her into the most miraculous human being I've ever met. To this day, I'll always refer to him as my great-grandfather, and if I have a son, I'll be naming him after him. The story always gets me very teary-eyed, but the thought of Alistair, my Nana's pretend dad, always makes me really happy. I know it makes her happy too. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.